For those of you who haven't been with us this year, this whole year we've had a theme of being awake. And each month we're being awake to some different facet of living, some different facet of spirit. And this month being August, where in the rest of the world it's sunny and warm, or maybe just as far as Salinas. It's a great time to be playful, and so I thought, let's practice being awake to delight. And the first week I talked about this, I said one of the keys is being present and permeable to delight, to being present to it as it shows up, and to be permeable, to let it in. And as I was putting together the talk this week, I kept having two very different things I wanted to say, which often happens. Be glad you're not in my study with me going all over here and going, how do I mesh these two? And so what I realized is these two different ways have to do with one aspect of the science of mind, and the other is what we really call the science of mind and spirit. So we're going to look at this idea of being permeable, especially in the idea of asking ourselves, how much joy, how much delight can we let in? And how much joy and delight is it okay to have? We're going to actually look at this, as I said, in two different ways. From a classic science of mind perspective, which gives us a great and powerful idea we'll be looking at, and then we'll be looking at it in a slightly different perspective. And what's great is this first idea that has to do with how much can I let something in, how much of something like joy, delight, or anything else that's my good or what I desire, how much is it really okay for me to let in? That this idea we can use it in all the different areas of our life. So we'll begin by taking a premise that our founder Ernest Holmes had, that many of the sages and mystics over the years have had, and that is that God is always giving of itself. Many of us who grew up in more traditional ways were taught that we had to earn God's favor, and that God smiled on some people but not on others because they weren't good enough or they hadn't earned it or whatever. But we teach and understand that God is always giving of itself. As Ernest Holmes said, God is always making the gift. Our job is to be awake to it, to be present to it, and accept it, to accept the gift. And that's that part of being permeable. And Ernest Holmes asked this question. So if God is always making the gift, if life or the universe, whatever you want to call it, is always making the gift of itself, are we meeting life with a thimble? Please, sir, could I have some more? Or are we bringing a gallon bucket? He often talks about a dipper. And so now when I see the Big Dipper in the sky, I think, yeah, that dipper. So I ask you that question. Are you meeting the gifts of life? Are you meeting joy, love, health, vitality, abundance? Are you meeting those gifts with a little tiny thimble or with your arms open wide? And whether we are or not, again, what we receive depends right here. That we have a filter of belief that allows us to either receive greatly or what I would call at home mingily. Ernest Holmes says it this way: how much of life we can accept depends on how much we can embody, how much we are willing to take in. And this all has to do with this great, I'll call it a concept, although that makes it sound more heady, something Ernest Holmes called the mental equivalent, which makes it sound like a math problem. So any of you who don't like math, don't go to sleep right now on me, okay? Promise, promise. But it's very simple. That the mental equivalent idea says that we have to have an idea of something in mind before it can show up in our life. And whatever the mental equivalent we have in mind is, that's the level of how it will show up. Let me say it the way Ernest Holmes said it. The range of our possibilities, what we can have in life, does not extend beyond the range of our present concept. The range of our possibilities does not, and in fact cannot, extend beyond the range of our present concept. What the heck do I mean? I mean that this thing called a mental equivalent, it is that inner idea of the level of good, but it often, in different areas of our lives, serves as a ceiling to our good. It's kind of like a comfort zone of good. Now we might say, well, why would I have a comfort zone of good?
Why? I want lots of good things in my life. I want lots of joy and delight. I want financial freedom. I want abundance. I want loving relationships and good, deep ones. Why would I want anything different? That's where we really have to take a look at what we believe and think about. How good can it be? How good do I get to have it? And it's different for each of us. This is what it looks like. Relationships. Now, some of us have a great mental equivalent of relationships, and so how we know is because we have great relationships. Whether they're a fabulous, long-lived primary relationship or some good, deep, close friends. We have a good mental equivalent. That means there's a freedom. We have a high ceiling about how much good we can have in that area. But if some of you were like me and had parents who bickered an awful lot of my life, they bickered, they argued, they were not close. What that did and what that kind of thing does for all of us is create a mental equivalent, an idea in my head of what marriage looked like. So even though consciously, of course, I didn't want a marriage that looked like my parents', guess what? Even though I did my best to marry someone who was nothing like my dad, this is interesting, but at a certain point in our relationship, I thought, this is looking awfully familiar. And we did work on it. Boy, we did work on it. But it became this difficult thing to say, oh, well, this is what relationships are like. And have you ever found somebody when you might be complaining about a relationship or your spouse or friend, it's like, yep, men are like that, or yeah, women are like that. It's like we all get in this collusion about how it can't really be good. So if we buy into it here, whether consciously or unconsciously, that's what shows up in our life. For me, I had to leave that relationship, free us both, and then I really had to do inner work to say, I deserve to have a loving, joyous, wonderful, mutually adoring relationship. Before I said, ew, adoring, ew, you know. We're strong people. I'm a strong woman. I don't need to be adored. I don't want to adore somebody else. And then, I got to a place where, adoring's okay. But I know, I'm really clear that I had to do the inner work to shift my mental equivalent, to raise my bar of how wonderful that could be. So that's one example. Finances. Great example of mental equivalence. Have you ever known, because I know it's nobody in this room, have you ever known somebody, this is a cliche, but I've seen it, that money literally burns a hole in their pocket? They may complain about living paycheck to paycheck, or worse, but as soon as they get some money, it's just like, I gotta find a way to spend it. That's why most lottery winners a year later, they haven't invested wisely and prudently and bought a house and done things. Usually they're back to where they were because there's no mental equivalent of being financially abundant. And boy, do we get that from our parents. I could do a whole class and have many times on what are the beliefs that create our mental equivalent about our finances and about being abundant in life. So I'm not going to get sidetracked on that, but that is a great place to start looking at what really do I believe about how I can live, how much financial good I can have, how much it's okay for me to have. They've done studies of salesmen and who are working on commission. And illustrates how this is, and you can plot the salesmen, and each of them, even though their range may differ from somebody else's, but they all have their own range, and their commission may bump down a little bit, so then they hustle and sell more, so it goes back into their range. It may bump up, but unless they do some work on their consciousness, the bump up isn't consistent, it goes back down. Because they have this mental equivalent, this mental comfort zone. And so raising our mental equivalent is about going past our comfort zone. I mean, can you imagine we'd all say, wow, I'm making more money, this is great, I'm going to keep on it. But often something seems to happen, and a big part of it is because we don't have that inner acceptance that I am successful, that it is okay for me to be financially abundant. For some of us at this stage in our lives, mental equivalent on health and aging, I've hit 55 or 65 or 75, so of course this is going to go wrong and that's going to go wrong. Or my life's going to narrow, or I have to turn into a curmudgeon. Fortunately, that is nobody I know here. But we have this mental equivalent, if we had a grandparent, if we had a grandparent who was really alive and vital, then yay, we've got a good mental equivalent for what aging looks like. But if we've had parents or grandparents that really got limited as they aged, and so we have that picture of that's what middle age or elder looks like, we start becoming that. So age and health and vitality is another area for mental equivalence. Any area really of good that we might desire and of that joy and delight is, if we're not having it and if we say we want more of it, we have to start paying attention to our mental equivalence. So how do we expand our mental equivalent? Well, the idea is that we start getting familiar with greater good. And the first thing we do, and I love Mary Menon Morrissey, it's hard to say, I love her, but I don't always love her name. Mary Menon Morrissey, who's a great and successful New Thought teacher, reminds us that as kids we daydreamed, we imagined, and then those of us who did it sort of obviously in school usually got it kind of knocked out of us or shamed out of us. But if we want to expand our permeability to delight or loving relationship or whatever it is, or all those things, that we need to allow ourselves to visualize, daydream, imagine, whatever is your word, to start seeing that good, to start entertaining it in mind. And two things will tend to happen. One is we'll start getting more comfortable. Oh, okay, I'm seeing myself, healthy. I'm seeing myself abundant. I'm seeing myself in this wonderful relationship. Oh, let me get into what it would feel like. We start creating the vibration that will draw it to us. We start changing our mental equivalent. What can also happen, which looks like the bad news, but is actually good news as well, is we're in the middle of that daydream about what has seemed to elude us, something that we really want in life. We see it, we're like reaching out, and then the yeah but comes up. I can't have it because I'm not worthy, I'm not educated, I haven't suffered enough. I mean, you all have your little favorite yeah but pool. And that is great because once the yeah but comes up, you need to grab it because then you know the piece of work to do to heal. Then you know the limiting belief that is getting in the way of you raising that mental equivalent. And once you get on that limiting belief, and we all have them, and we all either have them consciously and so can say, yeah, I've seen your bad news. Thank you for sharing. Go do something else. Or they're unconsciously running us, so we all have them, is that when we've got that limiting belief, we see what it is and we go, oh man, what am I going to do with this? That is the perfect time to see one of our licensed practitioners, to take a class, and we're starting a foundations class in the fall that is the beginning class in our teaching. Great way to start working with a lot of the spiritual tools of this teaching and really have them be part of your toolkit. Also, on 2 Sundays a month, we do kind of practicums. One's called Prayer Lab, and one's called Life 101. Great ways to come with, I realized I have this limiting belief. How can I work with it? How can I heal it? How can I start letting it go? So when we start working with our mental equivalent and try to go beyond it and raise it, if we get those limiting thoughts, that's the good news, because now you know what's in your way, and what's in your way is not the truth. It's just some idea you picked up from somewhere. We all have them, as I said, and it's come to pass. It's come up to your awareness so you can release it and step into that good. So we visualize or daydream or imagine our greater good, our heart's desire in some area. We notice the yeah buts. And then out in the world, what's really great practice is to start hanging out with people who have what you want. Now, let me explain this. Sounds a little strange. First of all, for those of us wanting to be more permeable to joy and delight, hang out with a kid. Find a kid. Don't grab one, but find a kid. And you can just go to a park and watch kids. There's like, Mom, look at that bug. Look at this bug. Oh, look at this bug. Kids don't go, yeah, I've seen a bug before. You get like a 3 or 4-year-old. They are so permeable to wonder and joy and delight every moment. Just kind of be in the atmosphere of, or borrow a niece or a nephew or a child or grandchild and just be in their eyes, be in their joy and delight, and sort of get kind of like used to, oh, this is how it looks, this is how it feels, okay? It's like trying something on. For relationships, some of you might have heard this story because I've told it. It was wonderful. I had a student in a class once who longed to have a loving relationship. And she found herself in this point in her life going to a lot of friends' weddings. And she said, you know, I just am so jealous, and I feel so bad that I go to these weddings and I'm just like, oh, how come you get to have it and I don't? And I'm mad. I just said, should I stop going? And I said, no, the only thing is that you have told yourself you don't get to have this. You need to shift your thinking when you go to the wedding to actually take in, as they stand at that altar and face each other in love, you need to take that in and bring that into your consciousness. Bring that in. It's like you're having what you might daydream. You're having it played out right in front of you so you can see it and perceive it. Bring it into your mind. Take that in so that it can become a part of your mental equivalent. Sometimes we can't imagine something until we see an example of it. I know I can be that way sometimes. You know, I had to literally watch some couples interact that were so different from my parents, you know, that were loving and respectful and had disagreements in a really civil way. And I'm kind of like, you know, it's the, wow, what a concept. Because that's how we work. If we don't even know another way is possible, it's hard to imagine it. And if it's hard to imagine it, then it's hard to demonstrate it or have it show up in our life. So I am really one for hanging out with people who live the lives you want to live. Another little interesting trick that this could sound kind of goofy, but I think it's great, is if you want more abundance in your life and want to get more comfortable with that, go to open houses in Carmel. You know, I love to go to open houses. It's fun to see new ideas and do things. And I used to feel embarrassed because I was not in a position to buy a house, certainly not some of the houses I go see. And, you know, I thought, I was feeling bad. And, you know, most real estate agents, especially around here, they're just fun and they're chatty and they're people. You know, every once in a while somebody will say, well, what'd you think? You know, but mostly I've just gone in and chatted with people, and especially if nobody else is there. If somebody else is there, then you can go look at the house on your own. And if nobody's there, then they're bored, so you can be there and chat them and entertain them. Either way, you go into this house and start feeling like, would this be okay if this were mine? It's a great conversation, and it's not that the goal of this teaching or the goal of my ministry is to have all of you living in $5 million houses in Carmel. That's not the be-all, end-all. That's not what I'm talking about. But if you feel like, I don't even have any experience, I don't even know what it would look like to be financially free, to be financially abundant, just walk around and get comfortable and like walk around and, you know, sort of see yourself in the house. Besides that, it's fun. It's fun. And especially if you catch yourself envying it, then you just shift and say, no. And Adina taught me something. Adina Reynolds, our Board of Trustees president, she said she learned from a friend that when she sees something that she doesn't have, she says, that's for me. You know, instead of like, oh, I don't have it, blah, 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 blah. So remember, God is always making the gift. We have to open up and say, that's for me. That wonderful kind of loving relationship, that wonderful vibrant health, that sense of joy that can come upon me in any moment, that's for me. Because nobody in life has a lock on the good things in life. So we can always increase where we are. So again, you visualize or daydream, notice the yeah buts, and get some assistance in healing them, and then hang out with the people who are being and having the things that you would like to get yourself familiar. So that's the science of mind part. That's the stuff we do in mind. The good news or the bad news about me is that there's always seems to be this part of me that as I'm talking about delight, then I open the newspaper and see what's happening in Egypt. And I've been fortunate enough to go to Egypt twice. And while that doesn't make me better or more compassionate than anyone, I have a personal connection there. And I know people who live there. And I know how dependent, number one, an awful lot of the people in that country are on tourism. So if it's dangerous to be there, they're going to suffer, even if something good is happening. And I think, how can I talk about delight when 700 people were killed in Cairo? Disconnect. And how can I be talking about us being more permeable to joy and delight, when there's a lot in the world that isn't joyful or delightful? Are we not being selfish to focus on this? Well, here's the thing about specifically joy and delight. As I said, mental equivalent, we can use it in all the areas of our life. But with joy and delight, we have to remember, more than almost anything else, my delight does not take away from your delight. There's no limit on this earth to joy and delight. There's not a finite piece that if I take too much delight or joy, you're not going to have some. More importantly, because some of us have that little bit like, I can't have too much, and we haven't really asked the question, because if I have too much, somebody else isn't going to get theirs? No, so just have to put that out there. But the other thing is that when we are truly delighted, and I don't mean when somebody throws us a compliment, or, we have a win. I mean that true meaning of delight that has a little bit of surprise in it, a little bit of awe. And is that deep joy. I mean, delight is a special word. It has light in it for a reason, where we get lit up inside. Surely that delight is a way we're not just more permeable to good, but more permeable to knowing God. We're in that moment of delight. We know our oneness with something. Maybe you haven't consciously said, now I know I'm one with God. But there is something in us that opens up, that feels wide open, and that feels lifted in that moment of delight. And so I say, and what I think I know, is that those moments of delight can lift us to a different way of seeing that is beyond the limits of sometimes what the facts present. And in that new way of seeing, and in that greater oneness, even though it's just that split second, we can allow ourselves to know that there is that which loves us so infinitely. There is that to rise up within each of us that can rise up everywhere on the planet. And so in that moment of delight, I can know this is possible for everybody. Maybe not in the way I perceived, it doesn't matter, but in that sense of delight, I can see and know greater possibilities. Much more possibilities than I can see when I'm clouded by despair. So when I allow myself to be delighted, it's almost as if the different pathways of my being can know a greater truth everywhere, And a greater truth known one place is known everywhere. It is contagious. How we be in the world is contagious. And so when we can move into that place of delight and breathe it out, we can share it with the world. And I think this is part of our work. And it's not even work, it's part of our practice. If we look at the sages through history, at the mystics, let me say the mystics, the Christian mystics who really had those unitive consciousness experiences, and whether they were Christian or not, they don't come back from those saying, wow, that sucked, I'm not doing that again. That was depressing. That connection with God, that was depressing. They are lit up. And then they went on to teach and love and live from that place of being lit up, from that inspiration. Now, I don't know about you. But I think having more inspired people on the planet, truly, deeply inspired, would kind of help things. So this idea of expanding our ability and willingness to experience joy and delight is an act of blessing the planet. That's what I wanted to remind you of. Hafiz, the great Sufi poet and mystic, which is what we would be if we were Islamic, wrote this way back in the 6th century or so. And he says, what is laughter? And I'm going to say this, what is joy, delight? What is laughter? What is laughter? It is God waking up. Oh, it is God waking up. It is the sun poking its sweet head out from behind a cloud you have been carrying too long, veiling your eyes and heart. It is light breaking ground for a great structure that is your real body, called truth. It is happiness applauding itself and then taking flight to embrace everyone and everything in this world. Notice, not me and my own little thing. Everyone in this world. Laughter is the pole star held in the sky by our beloved, who eternally says, yes, dear ones, come this way. Come this way toward me and love. Let us allow ourselves to be joyful and delighted. Let us allow ourselves to walk toward that greater love. Embody it, and then we can be it. So it is.